My heart will never be yours." The words escaped like blades between the clenched teeth of the Duke of Thornfield, so low that only she could hear them. The ballroom bustled around them, crystalline laughter, the sweep of silk gowns across polished marble, the clinking of champagne glasses. But between Sebastian Blackwood and Lady Eleanor Brennan, widow of the late Viscount Brennan, there was only silence, a silence that weighed like molten lead. She did not look away. Those blue-grey eyes, which he had tried to forget for an entire decade, remained fixed on his with a disturbing calm. Eleanor did not tremble, did not retreat. She merely inclined her head slightly, as if accepting a death sentence pronounced with elegance. "I never asked it to be," she replied, her voice soft as torn velvet. Sebastian felt his jaw tighten. The white gloves he wore seemed to constrict his fingers, and he had the sudden urge to tear them off, to feel something real against his skin. Pain, cold, anything but this pressure in his chest that had suffocated him from the moment he saw her cross through the gates of Pemberton Hall. 9 years. 9 years since he had been in the same room with her. 9 years since the funeral. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, do you also love emotional stories like this one? And where are you watching from? Don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel and shows that you want more stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Now, take a deep breath and come with me, because what happens next will give you chills. "What are you doing here?" The question came out harsher than he intended, almost accusatory. He knew he had no right to question her. Lady Brennan was a respectable widow, with standing in London society, an honoured guest of the Duchess of Pemberton, but seeing her there in that midnight blue silk gown that accentuated the paleness of her skin, her dark blonde hair pinned in elegant curls that left her neck exposed, it was unbearable. "I live in London again," Eleanor said, and there was something in that statement, a confession disguised as mundane fact. The property in Derbyshire became unsustainable. Unsustainable, a delicate word to describe ruin. Sebastian knew the rumours, the Viscount's gambling debts, the disastrous investments, the estate mortgaged 3 times over before his death. Edward Brennan had been many things: childhood friend, Eton companion, the man who had stolen the only woman Sebastian had ever loved. But he had never been prudent. "And your daughter?" He did not want to ask, did not want to show that he knew, that during all those years he had kept his ears attuned to any news about Eleanor Brennan, but the words escaped anyway. Something changed in her face, a slight tremor in her lips, quickly controlled. "Catherine is well, she is 9 now." 9 years. The same age their marriage would have been if... Sebastian pushed the thought away, like one pushes away hot coals with bare hands. No, there would be no if. She had chosen. Chosen Edward, chosen security, chosen the title of Viscountess, instead of waiting for a second son with no prospects, who was still struggling to inherit a distant and unlikely dukedom. Except that he had inherited. 6 months after her marriage, when his cousin died without heirs. Cruel irony of fate, or divine punishment for having desired things that did not belong to him. "Why are you speaking to me?" Sebastian took a step back, creating distance, creating air. "We have spent years mastering the art of avoiding each other. Why break that tradition now?" Eleanor drew a deep breath, and he saw the movement of her chest beneath the modest neckline. He immediately looked away, fixing his gaze on a point above her head, where the crystal chandelier cast prisms of golden light. "Because I need your help," she said finally, and there was desperation in those words, a desperation so deep that Sebastian felt it reverberate in his own bones. "And you are the only man in all of London with power enough to grant it." He forced a dry laugh. "My power? Lady Brennan, you overestimate me." "Duke of Thornfield," she pronounced the title like an accusation. "Advisor to the Prince, owner of half of Kent, the man whose word can ruin or save reputations with a single nod of his head." Eleanor took a step toward him, and Sebastian caught the perfume she wore, jasmine and something darker, amber perhaps, the same perfume from 10 years ago. "Do not feign modesty with me. We know each other far too well for that." No, past tense. As if that knowledge had expired, as if the intimacy they had once shared were now merely cold ashes. "What do you want?" Sebastian asked, and he hated himself for the way his voice sounded, tired, defeated, as if 9 years of cultivated hatred could crumble in a matter of minutes. Eleanor looked around, checking if anyone was close enough to overhear. Then, with a courage he reluctantly admired, she lifted her chin and said, "I need you to pretend to court me." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sebastian's feet. Sebastian stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. The music from the orchestra swelled around them, a waltz, light and graceful, completely at odds with the storm raging inside his chest. "Pretend to court you," he repeated slowly, each word carefully measured as if testing their weight. "Have you lost your senses?" Eleanor's expression did not change, but he saw her hands clasped tighter in front of her, the knuckles whitening beneath her gloves. "I would not ask if there were any other option." "There are always other options." Sebastian forced himself to speak coolly, clinically, as if discussing the weather or the price of wheat. "Find another gentleman. London is full of them. Ambitious second sons, widowers seeking companionship, fortune hunters who would be delighted to attach themselves to a vice-countess, ruined estate or not. It must be you." Her voice cracked just barely on the last word. "Only you have the standing to silence the rumors. Only you have the influence to—" "What rumors?" Sebastian interrupted, though part of him did not want to know. Part of him wanted to turn and walk away, to leave her standing there in her blue silk gown, to preserve the careful distance he had maintained for 9 long years. But he did not move. Helena glanced around again, and this time Sebastian noticed the way her shoulders tensed, the way her breathing had quickened. She was afraid, truly afraid. "They say Catherine is not Edward's daughter." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples of implication in every direction. Sebastian felt his blood turn cold. "That is absurd. She was born barely 10 months after your wedding. I was at the christening." He stopped abruptly, the memory searing through him like a brand. He had not meant to attend, had sworn he would not, but Edward had asked, had written letter after letter, and finally Sebastian had relented, had stood in that ancient church and watched Eleanor hold her infant daughter, and had felt something inside him die all over again. "The timing is not the issue," Eleanor said quietly. "The issue is that Catherine does not look like Edward. She has dark hair where both Edward and I are fair. She has your—" She stopped herself, but not quickly enough. Sebastian's heart hammered against his ribs. "She has my what?" "It does not matter." Eleanor shook her head, a loose curl falling against her cheek. "What matters is that Lady Ashworth has been spreading poison at every tea, every salon, every social gathering for the past month. She claims that I was unfaithful, that Catherine is a bastard, that Edward knew, and that is why he drank himself into an early grave." Lady Ashworth. The name alone made Sebastian's jaw clench. Edward's aunt, a bitter widow who had expected to inherit the Viscountcy's unentailed properties when Edward died childless, except he had not died childless. Catherine existed, and with her, Eleanor's claim to the dower house and a modest income. "So this is about money," Sebastian said flatly. "This is about my daughter's future." Eleanor's voice rose sharp with desperation before she caught herself and lowered it again. "If these rumors take hold, Catherine will be ruined before she is even old enough to understand why. No respectable family will receive her. No gentleman will offer for her. She will be marked as illegitimate, regardless of the truth. And what is the truth?" The question slipped out before Sebastian could stop it, dangerous and weighted with implications he did not want to examine. Eleanor met his gaze directly. "The truth is that Edward was my husband, that I was faithful to my marriage vows, that Catherine is legally his heir and entitled to everything that position affords her. Legally." She had said legally, not biologically. The distinction was so subtle that anyone else might have missed it, but Sebastian had spent a lifetime learning to read the spaces between Eleanor's words. A memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. Summer 10 years ago, the garden at Hartwell Manor, where Eleanor's family had hosted a house party. He had found her by the roses in the fading twilight, and they had talked about nothing, about everything, about dreams and fears and the kind of future neither of them dared name aloud, and then he had kissed her. It had been brief, almost chaste by some standards, just the press of his lips against hers, the whisper of her breath mingling with his, the impossible softness of her mouth, but it had felt like falling off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating and utterly irreversible. The next morning Edward had announced his intention to court her. The morning after that, Eleanor's father had accepted his suit. Within 6 weeks, they were married. Sebastian had not been invited to the wedding. He had received the news by letter, cold and formal, and had promptly gotten drunk for 3 days straight. When he finally sobered up, Edward had come to see him, had gripped his shoulder with false heartiness, and said, "No hard feelings, old friend, you understand she needed security and I could provide it. You would have done the same in my position." Except Sebastian would not have. He would have waited, would have fought, would have sold his soul if necessary to give Eleanor the life she deserved. but she had not asked him to. How exactly would courting you silence these rumors? Sebastian asked, dragging himself back to the present. If anything, it would fuel them. Look, they will say, the Duke of Thornfield pursues Edward Brennan's widow. Perhaps he was involved with her all along. Perhaps the child truly is his. Eleanor flinched as if he had struck her. That is why it must be obvious that the courtship is recent, that it began only after my return to London, that you are a man of honor drawn to a respectable widow, not— She trailed off, unable to finish. Not your former lover, Sebastian supplied coldly. We were never lovers. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. No, he agreed. We were not. We were something far more dangerous than that. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with everything they had never said, everything they had buried and tried to forget. If you court me publicly, Eleanor continued. Her words rushed now as if she feared losing her nerve. It will demonstrate that a man of your reputation and standing sees nothing shameful in my history. Lady Ashworth's accusations will seem petty and baseless. Catherine will be protected. And what do I gain from this arrangement? Sebastian asked, though he already knew he would agree. Knew it the moment she had asked. Perhaps had known it the moment he saw her walk into the ballroom tonight. Eleanor's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. The satisfaction of doing the right thing? The knowledge that you have saved an innocent child from the cruelty of society? I am not that altruistic. No, she agreed softly. You are not, but you are that loyal. Edward was your friend once, and despite everything, I do not think you want to see his daughter suffer for circumstances beyond her control. Edward, always Edward, standing between them even in death. Sebastian exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was madness, absolute madness. To deliberately place himself in Eleanor's orbit again, to pretend affection when the truth was so much more complicated and painful, it would be torture of the most exquisite kind. But she was right. He could not stand by and watch a child be destroyed by gossip and spite, even if that child was a living reminder of everything he had lost. 3 months, he said abruptly. I will court you for 3 months. We will be seen together at appropriate social functions. I will dance with you at balls, escort you to the theatre, drive with you in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour. At the end of 3 months, we will have a quiet, mutual parting. You will say I was a perfect gentleman, but that your heart remains with Edward's memory. I will say that I respect your devotion and wish you well. Society will applaud our restraint and good sense, and Lady Ashworth's rumors will be thoroughly discredited. Eleanor's eyes glistened, and for a horrible moment Sebastian thought she might cry, but she only nodded, once, sharply. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me. Sebastian's voice was rough. And do not mistake this for forgiveness. I am doing this for the child, not for you. It was a lie and they both knew it, but Eleanor accepted it with grace, inclining her head as she had done at the beginning of their conversation. Of course, Your Grace. The formal address stung more than any insult could have. Sebastian turned away, already regretting his agreement, already knowing he would not, could not, take it back. I will call on you tomorrow afternoon, he said, without looking at her. Make sure you are home to receive me. And then, before his resolve could crumble entirely, he walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone beside the pillar, a figure in blue silk surrounded by golden light and shadows of the past. Behind him, the orchestra played on. Sebastian did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed at Thornfield House, staring at the ceiling where moonlight painted silver patterns through the heavy curtains, and wondered what particular brand of divine punishment had brought Eleanor Brennan back into his life. 3 months. He had agreed to 3 months of deliberate proximity to the one woman he had spent nearly a decade trying to forget. 3 months of pretending that her presence did not affect him, that the sound of her voice did not make his chest tighten, that he could look at her without remembering how she had felt in his arms during that single stolen moment in a garden that no longer existed. He rose before dawn, dressed without calling his valet, and went to his study. There, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, he tried to work. But the numbers blurred before his eyes, and the letters from his steward might as well have been written in Sanskrit for all the sense they made. Finally, as the sun crept above the London rooftops, Sebastian pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote a single name, Lady Ashworth. If he was going to play this game, he needed to understand the rules, and that meant understanding exactly what Eleanor was up against. By 10 o'clock he had dispatched 3 discreet inquiries. By noon, he had his answers. Lady Constance Ashworth, aged 53, widow of the late Baron Ashworth and aunt to the deceased Viscount Brennan. She had expected Edward to die childless. He had been sickly as a boy, prone to fevers and weakness, and his later descent into drink had only accelerated what she presumed would be an inevitable early death without issue. Catherine's existence had been an unwelcome surprise. The child's survival past infancy had been an outright catastrophe to Lady Ashworth's financial expectations. The dower house should have reverted to her. The small but respectable annual income from the Viscountcy's remaining unentailed properties should have been hers. Instead, it all went to Eleanor and her daughter, and Lady Ashworth had been forced to live on a much reduced widow's portion in a modest townhouse in an unfashionable part of Mayfair. Bitterness, Sebastian thought, could poison even the most respectable heart. But there was more. Lady Ashworth had not simply been spreading idle gossip. She had been methodical, calculating. She had approached old friends of the Brennan family with tearful concern for poor Catherine, innocent victim of her mother's indiscretion. She had mentioned, always in confidence, always with the caveat that she hated to speak ill, that Eleanor had been seen in compromising positions during her marriage, that Edward had confided his doubts about Catherine's parentage. That Eleanor's sudden return to London, rather than remaining quietly in the country as a proper widow should, suggested a woman of questionable morals seeking new prey. None of it was actionable, none of it was explicit enough to constitute slander, but it was devastatingly effective. Already, 3 families had withdrawn invitations to Eleanor, 2 prominent hostesses had forgotten to include her on their guest lists, and just yesterday, Lady Jersey, one of the Almack's patronesses, had made a pointed remark about the importance of unimpeachable character when Eleanor's name had been mentioned. If this continued unchecked, Eleanor would be socially ruined within a month, and Catherine with her. Sebastian sat back in his chair, fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. This was worse than he had realized. Eleanor had not been exaggerating the threat, and his agreement to court her rather than being a simple favor was now a strategic necessity. The question was whether it would be enough. At precisely 3 o'clock, as promised, Sebastian's carriage arrived at the narrow townhouse Eleanor had let in Bloomsbury. It was a respectable address, if not a fashionable one, the kind of place where a widow of moderate means might live quietly without drawing attention. The door was answered by an elderly housekeeper who looked at Sebastian's ducal crest with wide eyes and ushered him into a small but well-appointed sitting room. The furniture was worn but quality, the kind of pieces that spoke of better days. A pianoforte stood in one corner, its surface marked with the rings of water glasses and the scratches of long use. Books lined a single shelf, their spines cracked from reading. It was, Sebastian realized with an uncomfortable pang, a home. Modest and faded, perhaps, but warm in a way that Thornfield House, with all its marble and gilt, had never been. "Your Grace." He turned to find Eleanor in the doorway. She wore a day dress of soft grey, simple and unadorned, with her hair pulled back in a loose knot. Without the armor of evening finery, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and more beautiful than he wanted to admit. "Lady Brennan." He bowed, formal and correct. She gestured to the sofa. "Please sit, I have sent for tea." "That is not necessary, this is not a social call." "No," she agreed quietly. "I suppose it is not." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, the air heavy with things neither wanted to say. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Catherine is upstairs with her governess. I thought it best that she not be present for this conversation." "Perhaps I should meet her," Sebastian said, surprising himself. "If we are to be seen together publicly, it would seem odd if I never acknowledged your daughter's existence." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. Yes, of course, but perhaps not today. I need to prepare her, to explain who you are. And who am I?" The question came out more bitter than he intended. "A family friend," Eleanor said carefully. "Someone who knew her father at school, someone who has kindly agreed to help us navigate society. A family friend." The phrase was both accurate and entirely inadequate to describe what he had been, what he was, what he might have been in another life. "I have been making inquiries," Sebastian said, steering the conversation to safer ground. "About Lady Ashworth and her campaign against you. It is more extensive than you indicated." Eleanor's face paled. "How extensive?" "She has been working systematically through your former social circle. The rumors she is spreading are carefully calibrated, nothing explicit enough to be challenged, but damaging enough to ruin you through innuendo and suggestion." He paused, watching her carefully. "Eleanor, if we do this, if I court you publicly, there will be consequences. Lady Ashworth will not simply concede defeat, she will escalate." "What do you mean?" "I mean that she will turn her attention to me, to us, She will dig into our past looking for any connection that supports her narrative. Sebastian leaned forward, his voice low and intense. We were seen together before your marriage, at house parties, in drawing rooms. People will remember, they will wonder, and some will conclude that perhaps Lady Ashworth was right all along, that you and I were involved, that Catherine is mine, that Edward discovered the truth, and that is what drove him to drink himself to death. Eleanor stood abruptly, walking to the window where thin afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. Her back was to him, rigid with tension. Then we must be above reproach, she said. Our courtship must be so proper, so conventional, so obviously recent that no one could possibly believe we had a prior attachment. Can we do that? Sebastian asked quietly. Can we be in the same room and pretend we are merely acquaintances, discovering mutual regard? She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes nearly undid him. We must, for Catherine's sake. Always for Catherine. Always for duty, for propriety, for everyone except themselves. Sebastian stood, crossing the small room to stand before her, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her grey eyes, close enough to catch the scent of jasmine that still haunted his dreams. Then understand this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I will play this role. I will be the perfect suitor, attentive but respectful, interested but not improper. I will squire you to balls and theatre and garden parties. I will dance with you, drive with you, sit in drawing rooms and make polite conversation while drinking terrible tea. But do not ask me to feel nothing. Do not ask me to forget, because I cannot, Eleanor. God help me, I cannot. Her breath caught, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw the same ache in her eyes that lived in his chest every waking hour. Then she stepped back, smoothing her skirts, and the mask fell back into place. I would never ask that of you, she said softly. I have no right to ask anything of you at all. Before Sebastian could respond, before he could say something foolish or true or both, there was a commotion in the hallway. A child's voice, bright and curious. Mama, Mrs. Davies says there is a duke here. Is that true? Is there really a duke in our sitting room? The door burst open, and Sebastian found himself looking at a girl with dark curls escaping from two braids, wearing a simple muslin dress and clutching a book to her chest. She had Eleanor's delicate features, but her coloring was darker, and her eyes were the exact shade of grey-green that Sebastian saw every morning in his shaving mirror. Catherine stopped in the doorway, staring at him with open fascination. Oh, she breathed, you are very tall. Despite everything, the tension, the pain, the impossible complexity of the situation, Sebastian felt his lips twitch. I suppose I am. Catherine, Eleanor said, her voice strained. You were meant to stay upstairs with Mrs. Davies. But I wanted to see the Duke. The child's gaze remained fixed on Sebastian with disconcerting intensity. Papa used to tell me stories about dukes. He said they lived in castles and fought dragons. I am afraid I have never fought a dragon, Sebastian said, and found himself kneeling so that he was at eye level with the girl. And Thornfield is hardly a castle, more of a very large, very draughty house. Catherine giggled, then clapped her hand over her mouth as if she had done something shocking. Are you really a friend of Papa's? The question, so innocent, so trusting, landed like a blow. Sebastian glanced up at Eleanor, who stood frozen, her face a mask of barely controlled emotion. I was, he said carefully, a long time ago. Did you like him? Catherine asked. Did he like you? Such simple questions, such impossible answers. Yes, Sebastian said, and found that it was true. He had liked Edward once before. He was a good man. Catherine considered this seriously. Then she thrust her book toward him. Would you like to see my book? It has pictures of all the constellations. Papa gave it to me before he died. Sebastian took the worn volume gently. On the inside cover, in Edward's familiar scrawl, was an inscription, for Catherine, who will grow up to reach the stars. All my love, Papa. Something in Sebastian's chest cracked. It is a fine book, he managed. Catherine beamed. Then, with the careless affection of childhood, she patted his hand where it rested on the book. I like you, she announced. You may come visit again. And before Sebastian could respond, before he could process the weight of her innocent words, Eleanor gently but firmly took her daughter's hand. Come, darling, the Duke has business to attend to, and you have lessons. Catherine went reluctantly, looking back over her shoulder at Sebastian with curious eyes. At the doorway, she paused. Will you come again? She asked. Truly? Sebastian looked at Eleanor, then back at the child. Yes, he heard himself say. I will come again. After they had gone, Sebastian stood alone in the sitting room, still holding the astronomy book. His hands, he noticed with distant surprise, were shaking. He set the book down carefully on the side table and walked to the door. The housekeeper appeared to show him out, and Sebastian went through the motions of departure, the bow, the thanks, the proper words that meant nothing. But as his carriage pulled away from the narrow townhouse in Bloomsbury, Sebastian allowed himself one glance back at the window where Eleanor stood watching, one hand pressed against the glass. And for the first time in 9 years, he wondered if the past was truly past at all, or if it had simply been waiting, patient and inevitable, to reclaim them both. The first public appearance came 3 days later at Lady Pemberton's garden party. Sebastian arrived fashionably late, as was expected of a duke, and found the manicured lawns of Pemberton House filled with London's elite. White pavilions dotted the grounds, their canvas sides rippling gently in the June breeze. Ladies in pastel silks clustered like flowers beneath parasols, while gentlemen in dark coats discussed politics and horses with equal gravity. He spotted Eleanor immediately. She stood near the rose arbor, speaking with the Duchess of Pemberton herself. A small victory, that. The Duchess was notoriously particular about her guests, and her public approval could go far in countering Lady Ashworth's whisper campaign. Eleanor wore pale green today, the color of new leaves, with cream lace at her throat and wrists. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure that must have taken her maid hours. She looked every inch the respectable Viscountess. She also looked terrified. Sebastian made his way through the crowd, accepting greetings and deflecting invitations with practiced ease. He could feel the ripple of interest that followed his progress across the lawn. The Duke of Thornfield was not known for attending garden parties. His presence here was already remarkable. What he did next would be scrutinized and analyzed and reported in tomorrow's scandal sheets. "So, Your Grace." The Duchess of Pemberton turned to him with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She was testing him, he realized, seeing if he would actually go through with this public courtship, or if Eleanor had been deluding herself. "Your Grace," Sebastian returned with a bow. Then deliberately he turned to Eleanor. "Lady Brennan, how delightful to see you again." "Duke Thornfield." Eleanor's curtsy was perfect, her voice steady. Only he could see the pulse fluttering at her throat. "I had not expected you to attend today. I find myself with an unexpected afternoon of leisure," Sebastian said smoothly. "And Lady Pemberton's gardens are without equal in London. I could not resist." The Duchess preened slightly. "You are too kind, Your Grace. Lady Brennan was just telling me about her return to town. Such a difficult decision leaving the country, but I do think London offers so much more for a young woman of quality." The emphasis on quality was subtle but deliberate. The Duchess was declaring her support, staking her considerable social capital on Eleanor's respectability. "Indeed," Sebastian agreed, "though I confess I am surprised we have not encountered each other sooner. I knew the late Viscount Brennan quite well in our youth." "Did you?" Eleanor's surprise was not entirely feigned. They had agreed that their courtship should appear spontaneous, but Sebastian was taking a calculated risk by mentioning Edward publicly. "We were at Eton together, a fine man, and a great loss." Sebastian allowed a moment of respectful silence, watching as several nearby guests turned to listen. "Good. Let them hear. I regret that circumstances prevented me from offering my condolences in person at the time of his death." "Your letter was most kind," Eleanor said softly, and Sebastian realized with a jolt that she was not acting. He had written, after Edward's death, a brief, formal note that had taken him 3 days and a bottle of brandy to compose. He had not expected her to remember it. "Would you care to walk?" Sebastian asked, extending his arm. "I believe there is a fountain beyond the rose arbor that is worth seeing." Eleanor hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough that it appeared maidenly caution rather than reluctance, then placed her gloved hand on his sleeve. The touch, light as it was, sent heat racing up his arm. They walked in silence at first, nodding to acquaintances, pausing to admire a particularly fine specimen of climbing roses. Sebastian was acutely aware of every eye upon them, every whispered speculation. This was the performance they had agreed to, and they were both playing their parts perfectly. But beneath the performance, beneath the careful choreography of respectability, there was something else, something raw and dangerous that pulsed between them with every step. "You are trembling," Sebastian said quietly when they were temporarily out of earshot. "I am terrified," Eleanor admitted. "Of what?" "Of this, of you, of failing Catherine." She drew a shaky breath. "Of Lady Ashworth appearing and making a scene." "She will not." Sebastian's voice was firm. "She is too clever for that. Her power lies in whispers, in suggestions." A public confrontation would force people to choose sides, and she cannot be certain which side they would choose. And which side would they choose? Sebastian looked down at her, at the way the sunlight caught in her hair, at the vulnerability in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. Mine, he said simply. They would choose mine, because I am a duke, and dukes are not questioned. How convenient, Eleanor said with a hint of bitterness, to have such unassailable authority. Is it? Sebastian's jaw tightened. I would trade all of it, the title, the power, the respect, for the ability to turn back time. But I cannot. None of us can. We can only move forward. They had reached the fountain, a baroque marble confection of nymphs and dolphins that sent arcs of water glittering in the afternoon light. No one else was nearby, though Sebastian knew they were still visible from the main lawn. Helena pulled her hand from his arm and walked to the fountain's edge, trailing her fingers in the water. Do you ever wonder, she asked without looking at him, what our lives would have been like if I had chosen differently? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and mesmerizing. Every day, Sebastian said, and the honesty of it surprised even him. But it does not matter, Eleanor. You made your choice. You married Edward. You had Catherine. And he stopped, unable to finish. You became a duke, Eleanor said. You gained everything. I lost everything. She turned to face him then, her eyes searching his. You cannot say such things. Why not? There is no one to hear. I can hear, Eleanor said, and there was anguish in her voice. And every word you speak makes this harder. What if I want it to be hard? Sebastian moved closer, drawn by a gravity he could not resist. What if I am tired of pretending that seeing you does not tear me apart? What if, Your Grace, Lady Brennan? They sprang apart as if scolded. Lady Worthington, a plump matron with a legendary appetite for gossip, bore down on them with the inexorability of a ship of the line. How charming to see you both admiring the fountain, she gushed. Duke Thornfield, I had no idea you were acquainted with dear Lady Brennan. Such a delightful surprise. Sebastian summoned every ounce of ducal composure. Lady Worthington. Yes, as I was just telling the Duchess, I knew the late Viscount Brennan in our youth. It seemed only proper to renew the acquaintance with his widow. How very thoughtful. Lady Worthington's eyes gleamed with speculation. And will we be seeing more of you at social functions this season, Your Grace? You have been quite the recluse these past years. I find that age brings a greater appreciation for society, Sebastian said blandly. One cannot live entirely in dusty libraries and account books. Lady Worthington laughed as if he had said something tremendously witty. Indeed not. And Lady Brennan, you must be so pleased to have such distinguished attention. Why, a gentleman of the Duke's standing showing interest in a widow. Quite the coup. The words were jovial, but the implication was clear. Eleanor should be grateful, should be flattered, should recognize how fortunate she was to receive notice from someone so far above her current station. Sebastian felt anger flare in his chest, but Eleanor merely smiled with perfect grace. The Duke honors me with his friendship, she said, as he honored my late husband with his. I am grateful for any connection to Edward's memory. Well played, Sebastian thought. She had deflected the innuendo and repositioned their relationship as one of shared mourning and respect. Lady Worthington would have difficulty twisting that into scandal. Of course. Lady Worthington looked slightly disappointed. Well, I shall leave you to your walk. But Duke Thornfield, you simply must come to my musicale next week. And perhaps you might escort Lady Brennan. It would be such a kindness. It was a test, Sebastian realized. Lady Worthington wanted to see how far this supposed courtship would go. I would be delighted, he said, looking directly at Eleanor. If Lady Brennan would do me the honor. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. They had not discussed this, had not planned beyond today, but she recovered quickly. That would be most agreeable, Your Grace. Lady Worthington beamed, already calculating how to be the first to spread this delicious news. She took her leave with many assurances of her delight, and Sebastian watched her hurry back toward the main party like a fox returning to its den with a particularly fat hen. Well, Eleanor said faintly, I suppose we are now officially courting. So it would seem. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Eleanor said very quietly, What you said before, about losing everything, did you mean it? Sebastian looked at her, at the woman who had haunted every moment of his life for 10 years, and knew that honesty was both the most dangerous and the most necessary thing he could offer. Yes, he said, I meant it. Eleanor's hand moved just slightly, as if she wanted to reach for him, but she caught herself curling her fingers into her palm instead. We should return to the party, she said. Yes, but neither of them moved. They stood beside the fountain, the water singing its endless song. while around them London society gossiped and speculated and spun their lives into stories that might or might not be true. And Sebastian thought, 3 months. He had agreed to 3 months of this exquisite torture. He wondered if he would survive it. The musicale at Lady Worthington's was exactly as tedious as Sebastian had anticipated. The soprano was shrill, the pianist heavy-handed, and the assembled guests more interested in gossip than music. But he endured it with the stoicism expected of a duke, sitting beside Eleanor in the crowded drawing room, while matrons watched them with calculating eyes. He wondered if he would survive it. The musicale at Lady Worthington's was exactly as tedious as Sebastian had anticipated. The soprano was shrill, the pianist heavy-handed, and the assembled guests more interested in gossip than music. But he endured it with the stoicism expected of a duke, sitting beside Eleanor in the crowded drawing room, while matrons watched them with calculating eyes. When the interminable performance finally ended, Sebastian offered Eleanor his arm for refreshments. They navigated through clusters of guests, accepting compliments and deflecting questions with practiced ease. The fiction of their courtship was taking root. He could see it in the knowing smiles, the approving nods, the way hostesses began positioning themselves to secure invitations for both of them. But beneath the surface performance, tension simmered. "You are gripping my arm rather tightly," Eleanor murmured as they paused beside a potted palm. Sebastian loosened his hold immediately. "Forgive me. Lady Ashworth is here." Eleanor's face went pale. "Where?" "Near the pianoforte, speaking with Mrs. Blackwood." Sebastian kept his voice low and even. "Do not look. Do not give her the satisfaction of seeing you rattled." "What is she doing?" "Watching us, as she has been all evening." Sebastian accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and handed it to Eleanor. "Drink this. You look as if you might faint." Eleanor took a sip, her hand trembling slightly. "I cannot do this, Sebastian. I cannot stand here and pretend while she—" "You can," he interrupted firmly, "and you will, because Catherine's future depends on it." The mention of her daughter steadied Eleanor as nothing else could. She drew a breath, lifted her chin and smiled as if they had been discussing the weather. "Better," Sebastian said. "Now, we are going to walk toward the terrace, slowly, as if we are seeking fresh air and privacy for conversation. We will pass close enough to Lady Ashworth that she can see we are unconcerned by her presence. And if she speaks to us, then I will be devastatingly polite, and you will be gracious, and she will have no ammunition to use against us." They began their slow progress across the room. Sebastian was acutely aware of Lady Ashworth's gaze following them, sharp as a blade. She was a handsome woman still, with Edward's same sharp features and pale eyes, but where Edward had possessed warmth, his aunt radiated cold calculation. As they drew level with her, Lady Ashworth's voice cut through the conversation. "Duke Thornfield, how unexpected to see you at such gatherings. I had thought musical entertainments beneath your notice." It was a calculated insult, suggesting that his presence here was motivated by something other than appreciation for the arts. Suggesting Eleanor, Sebastian turned with glacial courtesy. "Lady Ashworth, what a pleasure. I find that my tastes have evolved. One grows weary of solitude." "Indeed." Her smile did not reach her eyes. "And Lady Brennan, how lovely you look. Mourning becomes you, though I note you have abandoned your blacks somewhat early." Eleanor had been out of full mourning for over a year, but the implication was clear. She was not properly honoring Edward's memory. "Edward would not have wished me to mourn forever," Eleanor said quietly. "He was always generous in spirit." "Yes," Lady Ashworth agreed. "Too generous, perhaps. He took on burdens that were not his to bear." The words hung in the air, loaded with insinuation. Sebastian felt Eleanor stiffen beside him. "Edward was a man of honor," Sebastian said, his voice cutting. "I knew him well, Lady Ashworth, better perhaps than some who claim his blood, and I can assure you that any burdens he bore with pride and dignity." Lady Ashworth's eyes narrowed. "You defend him admirably, Your Grace, though I wonder, where was this loyalty when he was alive? You were notably absent from his life during his final years." It was a direct hit. Sebastian had avoided Edward after the marriage, unable to bear the sight of him with Eleanor. It was cowardice, and they both knew it. But before he could respond, Eleanor spoke. "The Duke sent letters," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor Sebastian could feel running through her. "Edward treasured them. He spoke often of their friendship, of their days at school. The distance between them was circumstance, not choice. It was a lie and a generous one. Eleanor was protecting him, even as Lady Ashworth sought to destroy her." "How touching," Lady Ashworth said. Though I suppose circumstances have a way of changing, do they not? Tell me, Your Grace, when did you renew your acquaintance with my nephew's widow? Before or after your return to London, Lady Brennan? The trap was expertly laid. If Eleanor said before, it suggested a prior connection. If she said after, it implied Sebastian had sought her out specifically, also suspicious. We encountered each other at the Pemberton ball, Sebastian said smoothly, quite by chance. I was pleased to discover Lady Brennan returned to society, and as a friend of her late husband, I felt it my duty to ensure she received appropriate welcome. Your duty? Lady Ashworth's tone was acid. How noble. And does this duty extend to escorting her to every social function, to monopolizing her time and attention? One might think your interest rather more personal than dutiful. One might think many things, Sebastian said coldly, but those with sense concern themselves with facts rather than speculation. Now, if you will excuse us. He guided Eleanor toward the terrace before Lady Ashworth could respond, feeling the older woman's venomous gaze burning into his back. Outside, the night air was cool and blessed with silence. Eleanor pulled away from him, walking to the stone balustrade and gripping it with white-knuckled hands. She will never stop, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. She will dig and insinuate and poison until there is nothing left of my reputation, nothing left to protect Catherine with. Eleanor, you do not understand. She whirled to face him, and Sebastian was shocked to see tears on her cheeks. She is right, about all of it. The timing, the circumstances, the way you look at me. How do I look at you? Sebastian demanded, moving closer. Like you are drowning and I am air. The words came out raw and honest. Like nothing in the past 9 years has changed anything at all. Sebastian should have denied it, should have stepped back, should have maintained the careful distance they had constructed, but he was so tired of lying. Nothing has changed, he said. Did you think it would? Did you imagine that time or distance or your marriage to my best friend would somehow erase what I felt? You must, Eleanor said desperately. You must erase it, Sebastian, because I cannot bear this. I cannot stand here and let you look at me that way when I know, She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. When you what? Sebastian's heart was pounding. Say it, Eleanor, for once in your life, say what you are thinking. When I know that Catherine is yours. The world seemed to stop. Sebastian stared at her, the words echoing in his head like thunder. What? Eleanor was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. She is yours, Sebastian, not Edward's, yours. That night, the night before my wedding, I came to you. Do you remember? You were drunk, half mad with grief, and I was so frightened of what I was about to do, and we... No, Sebastian's voice was hoarse. No, we did not. I would remember. You were drunk, Eleanor repeated, and I was desperate, and it happened so quickly, so improbably. And then the next day I married Edward, and I prayed, God how I prayed, that the child would be his, that the timing would obscure the truth. But she has your eyes, Sebastian, your coloring, and every day she grows more like you, and I am terrified that someone will see, will know. Stop. Sebastian could not breathe, could not think. Edward. Did Edward know? Eleanor's silence was answer enough. He knew, Sebastian said, the pieces falling into horrible place. That is why he married you, not for your father's connections or your dowry. He married you, to protect the child, to protect me. He loved you, Eleanor whispered. More than he loved me, I think. He said that you would never survive the scandal, that it would destroy you, and so he offered to marry me, to claim the child as his, to give us all a way forward. Sebastian felt as if he had been gutted. Edward, his friend, his brother in all but blood, had sacrificed his own happiness, had bound himself to a loveless marriage, had raised another man's child, all to protect Sebastian from the consequences of a single drunken night he could not even remember. Why did you not tell me? His voice was barely audible. Because Edward made me promise, made me swear that you would never know, that the secret would die with him. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, and I kept that promise for 9 years, would have kept it forever. But now Lady Ashworth is circling, and Catherine is old enough to ask questions, and I am so tired of lying. She broke off, sobbing. Sebastian moved without thinking, pulling her into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against him, her tears soaking into his jacket. I have a daughter, he said wonderingly. Catherine is mine. Yes, and I have missed 9 years of her life. Yes, the weight of it crushed him. 9 years of birthdays and first words and childhood illnesses. 9 years of watching her grow, of being her father in truth rather than title. Edward had lived those years, had been there for all of it. had given Catherine the love and attention she deserved, had done what Sebastian should have done. "I do not know whether to thank him or hate him," Sebastian said roughly. "Neither," Eleanor said against his chest. "Just forgive him, forgive us both. We did what we thought was best." "Best?" Sebastian pulled back to look at her. "You let me believe she was Edward's. Let me stand at his funeral and mourn him as a friend when all the while he was raising your daughter," Eleanor finished. "Yes, because that is what friendship means, Sebastian. Sacrifice, protecting those you love, even when it costs you everything." She was right, and the truth of it was unbearable. Sebastian released her, walking to the balustrade and staring out at the darkened garden. "What now?" he asked. "What do we do with this truth?" "Nothing," Eleanor said. "We do nothing. We continue the charade. We let society believe I am a respectable widow and you are an honorable suitor. And Catherine never learns that her father was not the man who raised her, but the man who abandoned her mother." "I did not abandon you," Sebastian said harshly. "I did not know. Does it matter?" Eleanor's voice was infinitely weary. "The result is the same. Edward paid the price for our mistake, and now we must live with it." She turned to go back inside, but Sebastian caught her wrist. "I want to know her," he said. "Catherine, I need 3 months," Eleanor said. "You agreed to 3 months of false courtship. After that, you will fade from our lives, and Catherine will never know the truth. That is the price of respectability, Sebastian. That is what you are buying with your attentions." She pulled free and walked back into the house, leaving Sebastian alone on the terrace with the shattered remains of everything he thought he knew. A daughter. He had a daughter, and he could never claim her. Sebastian did not return to Thornfield House that night. Instead, he walked through Mayfair's elegant squares, past darkened townhouses where London's elite slept peacefully, unaware that his entire world had fractured and reformed into something unrecognizable. Catherine was his daughter. The words repeated in his mind like a litany, like a prayer, like an accusation. Every step brought new implications, new questions, new agonies. Had Edward resented her? Had he looked at the child and seen his friend's betrayal written in her features? Or had he loved her anyway with the generous spirit that had always defined him? Sebastian suspected the latter. Edward had possessed a capacity for selfless love that Sebastian had never understood, until now. Dawn found him at Edward's grave in the cemetery at Kensal Green. The headstone was simple, befitting a minor viscount. Edward James Brennan, Viscount Brennan, 1795-1855. Beloved husband and father, no mention of friend, no acknowledgement of the sacrifice he had made. "You should have told me," Sebastian said to the cold marble. "You should have trusted me." But would he have done the right thing if Edward had? Would a young, penniless second son have married a woman carrying his child, defying society and his own family? Or would he have found excuses, justifications, ways to avoid responsibility? Sebastian wanted to believe he would have been honorable, but standing here with 9 years of hindsight and the weight of Edward's sacrifice pressing down on him, he was no longer certain. "I am sorry," he said finally, "for all of it, for taking what was not mine, for letting you bear the burden alone, for hating you when you deserved only gratitude." The stone offered no absolution. Sebastian had not expected it to. He returned home as the city was waking, sent his anxious butler away with assurances that he was well, and locked himself in his study. There he pulled out paper and began to write. Not a letter, he did not know who he would send it to, but a catalogue of truths. "Catherine has my eyes, my colouring, my stubborn chin that my mother always despaired of. Eleanor married Edward to protect me, not for money or security, but to shield me from scandal. Edward raised my daughter as his own, loved her, was loved by her, was the father I should have been. I have been courting my daughter's mother for less than 2 weeks and already I am undone. Lady Ashworth will destroy them both if I fail. I cannot fail." The last line stared up at him, absolute and terrifying, because it was not about the charade anymore. It was not about 3 months of false courtship followed by a polite separation. It was about Catherine, about Eleanor, about family in a way that transcended duty or obligation. He had a daughter, and she was in danger. By the time his secretary arrived at 9 o'clock, Sebastian had made his decision. "Send for my solicitor," he said, "immediately, and my man of business. I need them both here within the hour. Your Grace, is something wrong?" "Everything is wrong," Sebastian said, "but I intend to make it right." 3 days later, Sebastian called on Eleanor again. This time he did not send advance notice. He simply appeared at her door at an hour calculated to find Catherine at her lessons. Eleanor received him in the same modest sitting room, her face pale and guarded. She had not contacted him since the musicale. He had not expected her to. Sebastian. His name on her lips was both question and accusation. "What are you doing here?" 3 days later, Sebastian called on Eleanor again. This time he did not send advance notice. He simply appeared at her door at an hour calculated to find Catherine at her lessons. Eleanor received him in the same modest sitting room, her face pale and guarded. She had not contacted him since the musicale. He had not expected her to. Sebastian. His name on her lips was both question and accusation. "What are you doing here?" "I want to see her," he said without preamble. "Catherine, I want to spend time with her, not as your suitor, not for appearance's sake, as her father." Eleanor stood abruptly. "Absolutely not. We discussed this. The truth must remain hidden." "Why?" Sebastian demanded. "Why must my daughter grow up never knowing me? Why must I watch from a distance while she calls another man father?" "Because Edward was her father," Eleanor said fiercely. "In every way that mattered. You were not there, Sebastian. You did not walk the floors with her when she had colic. You did not sit by her bedside through scarlet fever. You did not teach her to read or comfort her nightmares, or explain why her papa had to go away sometimes, because the drink called louder than she did." "Because Edward was her father," Eleanor said fiercely. "In every way that mattered. You were not there, Sebastian. You did not walk the floors with her when she had colic. You did not sit by her bedside through scarlet fever. You did not teach her to read or comfort her nightmares, or explain why her papa had to go away sometimes, because the drink called louder than she did." The bitterness in her voice was searing. "No," Sebastian said quietly. "I did not do any of those things, because I was not given the chance. But I am here now, Eleanor, and I want to know my daughter." "For how long?" Eleanor's eyes flashed. 3 months? 6? Until the novelty wears off and you return to your comfortable bachelor existence? Children are not curiosities, Sebastian. They need constancy, reliability, things you have never been required to provide. "Then teach me," Sebastian said desperately. "Show me how to be what she needs, but do not ask me to walk away. Not now. Not when I finally understand what I lost." Eleanor turned to the window, her shoulders rigid. "Lady Ashworth suspects. I saw it in her eyes at the musicale. If you become too involved with Catherine, if you show too much interest, she will piece it together. And then everything Edward sacrificed will have been for nothing." "Or," Sebastian said slowly, "Lady Ashworth will see a man who is falling in love with a widow, who is courting her properly, who naturally takes an interest in her daughter as part of that courtship. It would be strange if I did not acknowledge Catherine's existence." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then, "You said falling in love." "Yes, past tense, as if it is happening now, rather than happened years ago." Sebastian moved to stand behind her, close enough that he could see her reflection in the glass. "Do you want the truth, Eleanor, or do you want me to lie?" "I want—" She stopped, pressed her hand to the window. "I do not know what I want anymore." "Then let me tell you what I want." Sebastian's voice was low, intense. "I want to know my daughter. I want to hear her laugh and see her smile and understand what makes her afraid or angry or joyful. I want to give her everything Edward gave her and more. I want to protect her from Lady Ashworth and every other threat that exists. And I want, God help me, Eleanor, I want you, not as a pretense, not as a 3-month arrangement, as my wife, as Catherine's mother, as the woman I should have fought for 10 years ago." Eleanor's breath caught. "You are mad." "Probably," Sebastian agreed, "but I am also right. You need protection that only marriage to me can provide. Catherine needs legitimacy that only my name can give her, and I need—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I need to stop living half a life, to stop being a ghost haunting my own existence." "People will talk," Eleanor said weakly. "People always talk, but they will not dare speak against the Duchess of Thornfield, and they certainly will not dare question my daughter's legitimacy once she bears my name legally." Eleanor turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if she hates me? When she is older, when she understands, what if Catherine hates me for lying to her all these years? Then we will face that together," Sebastian said, taking her hands. "All 3 of us as a family, the way we should have been from the beginning. You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Will you marry me, Eleanor? Not for scandal or protection or duty, but because we deserve a chance at the happiness we were denied." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, and Sebastian saw the war raging behind her eyes. Fear and hope, duty and desire, past and future all colliding. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. Yes. The engagement was announced a week later. London society reacted with predictable shock. A duke marrying a minor viscount's widow was unusual, though not unheard of. That he would also be adopting her daughter raised eyebrows, but was generally considered noble. Lady Ashworth's response was less measured. She appeared at Thornfield House the day after the announcement, demanding an audience. Sebastian received her in his study, standing behind his desk like a judge before a defendant. "You cannot do this," she spat without preamble. "That child is not Edward's. I know it. And you know it too, do you not? That is why you are so eager to claim her, because she is yours, born of adultery and lies." "Lady Ashworth," Sebastian said with deadly calm, "you will not speak of my future wife or daughter in such terms. Not in my house, not anywhere. Future daughter," she sneered. "You mean bastard. Do you truly believe society will accept this charade, that no one will see through your sudden devotion?" "I believe that society will accept what I tell them to accept," Sebastian said coldly. "I am the Duke of Thornfield. My word is law in ways you cannot comprehend, and my word is that Lady Eleanor Brennan is a woman of impeccable character who has suffered more than enough at the hands of vicious gossips with nothing better to occupy their time." "Edward confided in me," Lady Ashworth said, "before he died. He told me the truth about that child." It was a lie. Sebastian could see it in the desperate gleam in her eyes. Edward would never have betrayed Eleanor or Catherine, not even to his aunt. "Then you will have no objection to producing this alleged confession in writing," Sebastian said. "Witnessed and dated, naturally. I'm certain my solicitors would be most interested in examining such a document." Lady Ashworth's face purpled. "You are protecting your mistress." "I am protecting my betrothed," Sebastian interrupted. "And if you continue this campaign of slander, I will use every resource at my disposal to destroy you. Socially, financially, legally. There is not a drawing room in London that will receive you, not a shop that will extend you credit. You will be ruined so completely that your own name will become a byword for cautionary tales about bitter women who overreach. You would not dare— Try me." Sebastian's voice was soft but lethal. "I have tolerated your malice because it amused me to see how far you would go. But touch my family again, and you will discover exactly how ruthless a duke can be when protecting what is his." Lady Ashworth stared at him, and Sebastian watched as calculation warred with fury in her expression. Finally, defeated, she turned and left without another word. Sebastian stood alone in his study, listening to her carriage pull away. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Because now he had to tell Catherine the truth. They told Catherine on a Sunday afternoon, in the small garden behind Eleanor's townhouse. It was Catherine's favorite place, a narrow strip of green with a single apple tree and a stone bench where she liked to read. Sebastian had wanted to wait, to give the child time to adjust to his presence before upending her world, but Eleanor had been firm. No more lies, no more secrets. Catherine deserved the truth, and she deserved it now, before the wedding that would change everything. The girl sat between them on the bench, swinging her legs and chattering about the book she was reading, something about pirates and treasure. Sebastian listened, trying to memorize every detail, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed, the animated gestures of her small hands, the intelligence that sparked in her grey-green eyes. His eyes. Eleanor caught his gaze, and he saw his own terror reflected there. Then she took a breath and said, "Catherine, darling, there is something we need to tell you." The girl looked up, suddenly serious in that way children become when they sense adult anxiety. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, not at all." Eleanor's voice wavered. "It is about the Duke, about why he has been visiting us, about why he and I are to be married." Catherine's face brightened. "Oh, I know that. You are in love. Mrs. Davies said so. She said that you look at each other the way people do in stories." Sebastian felt something crack in his chest. Children saw so clearly what adults tried to hide. "Yes," Eleanor said softly, "we do love each other, but there is more to it than that. Catherine, do you remember how we talked about how babies are made? About how a man and woman come together to create a child?" Catherine nodded solemnly. "And then the baby grows in the mama's belly for many months." "That is right. Well, darling, sometimes things happen that are complicated. Sometimes a baby is created before a wedding, and sometimes—" Eleanor's voice broke. "Sometimes the man who creates the baby is not the same man the mama marries." There was a long silence. Sebastian watched Catherine's face as she processed this, saw the moment understanding began to dawn. "You mean me?" she said quietly. "You are talking about me, are you not?" Eleanor's tears spilled over. "Yes, darling, I am talking about you." Catherine looked at Sebastian, her expression unreadable. Papa was not my real papa. Yes, the word came out hoarse. I did, though I did not know it until very recently. Your mama and I, we made a mistake a long time ago, and Edward, being the good man he was, chose to help us, to protect us, to give you the life you deserved. Why did you not want me? The question was delivered without accusation, but it devastated Sebastian nonetheless. Oh, Catherine! He dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her small hands in his larger ones. I did not know about you. If I had known, I would have wanted you more than anything in the world. I would have, his voice broke, I would have moved heaven and earth to be your father. But you were not. Catherine's eyes, so like his own, searched his face. Papa was my father. He read to me and played games with me and held me when I cried. You were not there. No, Sebastian said, and the admission tasted like ash. I was not there, and I am sorrier for that than I can ever express. But I am here now, Catherine, and I would like, if you would allow it, to be part of your life going forward. Not to replace Edward, never to replace him, but perhaps to be, he struggled for words, to be another person who loves you, who wants the best for you, who will always be there when you need him. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, and Sebastian held his breath waiting for her judgment. This child, this 9-year-old girl with her serious grey-green eyes, held his entire future in her small hands. Finally, she said, "Will you tell me about him? About Papa? What he was like when you were boys together?" Relief flooded through Sebastian. "I would be honored to. And will you let me still call him Papa, even though you are—" She stopped, uncertain. "So you should call him Papa," Sebastian said firmly. "Always. He earned that name, I have not. Perhaps someday, if you wish it, you might call me something else. But there is no hurry. We have time." "How much time?" "As much as you need," Sebastian promised. "I am not going anywhere." Catherine studied him for another moment, then nodded once, decisive. "All right then. I suppose you may marry Mama, but you must promise to be kind to her. She cries sometimes when she thinks I am not listening, and Mrs. Davies says it is because she is lonely." "I promise," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never has cause to cry again." "Good." Catherine stood, smoothing her skirts in an unconscious echo of her mother. "May I go back to my book now? The pirates have just discovered the treasure island." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Yes, darling. Go read." They watched Catherine skip back to the house, apparently untroubled by the revelation that had turned her world upside down. The resilience of children, Sebastian thought, was both miraculous and humbling. "She took that remarkably well," he said. "She will have questions later," Eleanor warned. "When the initial shock wears off, when she realizes what this means for her place in the world, then we will answer them. Together." Sebastian pulled Eleanor into his arms, and she came willingly, tucking her head beneath his chin. "Thank you for giving her to me, even if I did not deserve it." "You deserved it," Eleanor said. "You just did not know it yet." They stood there in the small garden, holding each other as the afternoon light turned golden. Around them, London carried on, carriages rattling past on the street, neighbors calling to each other, the distant bells of a church marking the hour. But in this moment, in this garden, there was only the two of them and the child reading about pirates beneath an apple tree. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the private chapel at Thornfield. It was a small affair, just close friends and family, which suited them both. Sebastian had no desire for spectacle, and Eleanor had even less. Catherine served as flower girl, wearing a dress of ivory silk that matched her mother's gown. She took her duties seriously, scattering rose petals with solemn concentration. When the vicar asked who gave this woman in marriage, Catherine piped up, "Papa does. And I do too." There was not a dry eye in the chapel. As Sebastian slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, he looked into her eyes and saw everything he had been searching for his entire life. Not perfection. They would never have that. Too much pain, too many mistakes, too much history stood between them. But they had truth now, and they had each other, and they had Catherine. "I love you," he whispered as they were pronounced man and wife. "God help me, I always have." "I know," Eleanor whispered back. "I know." The kiss was chaste, appropriate for a chapel and an audience, but it held a promise of everything to come. Nights and days, joy and sorrow, the ordinary miracle of a life built together. Afterward, there was a small breakfast at Thornfield. Catherine explored the house with wide eyes, marveling at the grand staircase and the library and the enormous ballroom that echoed when she ran across it. "Is this really ours now?" she asked Sebastian. "This whole house?" "It is really yours," Sebastian confirmed, "though I should warn you, it is drafty in winter and the east wing has bats." Catherine's eyes lit up. "Bats? May I see them?" "When you are older," Eleanor interjected firmly. "Much older." They dined as a family that night, just the three of them in the smaller dining room. Catherine regaled them with plans for the house. A playroom here, a garden there, perhaps some cats to deal with the mice she was certain must exist in such a large place. Sebastian listened and nodded, and felt something he had not experienced in years: contentment, the bone-deep satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. Later, after Catherine had been tucked into her new bedroom with reassurances that they were just down the hall if she needed them, Sebastian and Eleanor stood together in the ducal chambers that were now theirs. "I cannot believe this is real," Eleanor said, running her hand along the carved bedpost, "that we are here, that after everything, we have this." "We almost did not," Sebastian reminded her, "if you had not been brave enough to ask for my help. If Catherine had not existed, if Edward had not loved us both enough to sacrifice his own happiness, he would be happy for us," Eleanor said. "I truly believe that. He wanted us to be together. That is why he did what he did." Sebastian drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Then we owe it to him to make this work, to build something worthy of his sacrifice." "We will," Eleanor promised, "starting now." And in the morning, when Sebastian woke to find Eleanor beside him and Catherine's laughter echoing from somewhere in the vast house, he thought, This is what I have been missing. This is home." 3 months later, Lady Ashworth left London. No one was quite sure where she went. Some said Bath, others claimed the continent. But she departed quietly, without fanfare, her threat neutralized by Sebastian's position and her own lack of evidence. The rumors about Catherine died with her departure. Society, ever fickle, moved on to new scandals and new gossip, and the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield were left to build their life in peace. It was not perfect. There were difficult conversations as Catherine grew older and understood more fully what her birth meant. There were moments when Eleanor's guilt threatened to overwhelm her. There were times when Sebastian still woke from dreams of Edward, still wondered if he had stolen something that was never meant to be his. But there was also joy. Catherine's laughter ringing through Thornfield's halls, Eleanor's hand in his as they walked through Hyde Park, family dinners where they argued about books and politics and whether cats truly were superior to dogs. And there was love, the kind of love that survives mistakes and tragedy and time itself. One evening, years later, Sebastian found Catherine in the library. She was 15 now, poised on the edge of womanhood, with Edward's gentle nature and Sebastian's stubborn determination. "Papa," she said, and Sebastian's heart still caught every time she used that name. She had started calling him that on her 12th birthday, shyly, as if seeking permission. He had wept like a child. "Yes, darling, I have been thinking about my father, my other father, the one who raised me." Sebastian set down his book, giving her his full attention. "What about him?" "I want to visit his grave, to tell him that I am happy, that you and Mama are good together, that he did the right thing." She looked at Sebastian with those grey-green eyes. "Will you come with me?" "Of course," Sebastian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I would be honored." They went the next day, all three of them. And as they stood before Edward's grave, Sebastian laid his hand on the cold marble and said, "Thank you, old friend, for everything. We will take care of each other, I promise, as you took care of us." Eleanor wept. Catherine laid a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, and Sebastian felt for the first time since that terrible night 10 years ago that perhaps he had finally made peace with the past. Because the past, he had learned, was not something to be erased or forgotten. It was foundation, it was context. It was the story of how they had all become who they were meant to be, and looking at his wife, at his daughter, at the life they had built from mistakes and sacrifice and stubborn, enduring love, Sebastian knew one thing with absolute certainty. His heart, once sworn never to belong to anyone, had found its home at last, not despite the pain, but because of it.